The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio.
WHYR 96.9 Baton Rouge.
Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. This is a live call-in show, so please feel free to call in and share your thoughts, questions, and rebuttals. 343-9927, 343-9927. Call in and tell us what you think or ask us a question, whatever. And tonight's topic, I have Mr. Mark Martin in the studio.
Hello.
I guess you're an amateur expert on...
Yeah, we'll go with that.
on sustainable transportation. You've been on to talk about that before, but also tonight we're going to talk about the building in floodplains and how it's affecting, or may be affecting, our communities. Mm-hmm. And also tonight the Metro Council is meeting and is going to be talking about... revising Chapter 15 of the Unified District Development Code, as well as Buddy Amoroso's proposed moratorium on building in floodplains. And let's talk about that first. I've got a copy of Mr. Amoroso's moratorium here. Now, of course, we're all thinking about the flooding last summer,
right.
And of course the continuing problems with drainage here in the city and all that, and of course the increases in building subdivisions and development of land in Baton Rouge also. And Councilman Buddy Amoroso of Baton Rouge District 8 proposed a 6-month temporary moratorium on building. I don't want to get too much into the boring details here, but on the issuance of approval of preliminary subdivision plats, rezoning for planned developments, and site plans greater than 50,000 square feet in areas of special flood hazard in East Baton Rouge Parish. And one of the reasons he cited for going ahead with this 6-month moratorium is because the Planning Commission is currently, or is about to start, reevaluating Chapter 15 of the Unified Development Code to see if maybe they could beef it up a little bit to prevent future developments from causing future problems or increasing current problems with flooding.
Right.
Okay, and I believe there are currently 4 proposed developments right now, a couple of them that have already been deemed that they meet the requirements for the Unified District
Development Code.
Code, yeah.
We'll just call it the UDC.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, those developments that I found, one was, and you've got a lot of information on this one, we'll come back to it, the lakes at Jones Creek, which is out on Coursey and near Jones Creek Road,
right,
in an area that's surrounded by development and which flooded last summer along with all the surrounding areas.
Right, yeah, it had about 4 feet of water on it.
Yeah, so that's one that the Metro Council is already, I think they've already approved that one, or at least said that it meets the standards. It meets the
Planning Commission approved it. It didn't have to go before the council.
Okay, good. Then there's another one, the Sanctuary, which is out on Baton and Tiger Bend Roads, the intersection of Baton and Tiger Bend. What do you know about that?
If it's the area I think it is, it's just another one of those places where you've got a wedge of land that's never been developed because it's so low. It's still in native habitat, current native habitat. It's between 2 waterways, and it's, there's development all around it.
Sure.
So in order to develop it, they have to do what they're planning to do at Jones Creek, which is to fill it in with a whole bunch of dirt, creating a dam, essentially.
Yeah, and the whole reason I found out about the lakes on Jones Creek was on local television. The citizens in the surrounding communities were having a fit over this because they know their neighborhood's flooded. The water that comes through the neighborhood goes to this area that is low,
Jones Creek.
Yeah, and now they're going to build up that area. So where's the water going to go? After that, and of course it says that the developers, of course, are opposing the moratorium.
Right.
And one of the developers says, well, hey, you can't stop us. It wouldn't be right to stop us because we meet the UDC's minimum requirements. And Amoroso's response was, well, of course they do, because the requirements are useless. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But,
yeah. Well, the biggest problem with that, I think, too, is that the UDC hasn't been reviewed and updated in 50 years, at least. And there have been any number of amendments made to it over time that have provided contradictory, legal yet contradictory conditions for development. And so when a developer comes in, they can say, well, we may have violated that, but we meet this, and because we meet this, you can't deny us this.
Ah, okay. Or they say, well, let's get our violation legal by getting the right people to approve it.
Or get a waiver through the Metro Council.
Yeah, right.
I was saying earlier that the previous master plan, the Horizon plan, had an 87% waiver rate. So that means that effectively it wasn't even there.
What was this master plan you're talking about?
I believe that any metropolitan area that meets a certain population criteria has to have an overall planning document, a plan for development. It's a plan. It's not necessarily an implementation. And so that plan it lays on top of the UDC, which provides the guidelines for development. If the plan and the UDC are not congruent, that is to say that if the two don't match, then there's conflict almost immediately, because if you're saying that my plan says you can't build in low land, but your actual planning document, the code says you can, then your plan is worthless.
Right.
And then when they updated that master plan with the future BR plan about 7 years ago, I think, they did not update the UDC. And the last year or two, there have been a number of efforts made. Well, let's say there's been a number of times that people have said you need to update the UDC, but the Planning Commission doesn't get any extra money, doesn't get any extra people, doesn't get any extra help to accomplish that goal. And so, while they want to have the UDC updated, they don't give them the facilities and the people to do it. So they're stuck. And so they piece it out.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that somebody requires communities of a certain size to have a plan, a building or development plan. Who requires it?
I believe that's a federal requirement.
And that probably became stricter or more managed. Well, no, actually you're saying it's not. 2012 was when the flood map or floodplain map was revised, I think, by FEMA, right?
Yeah, something along those lines. And the first plan was only implemented back in the 90s.
Okay.
So it's not a long-term thing.
Okay, now I didn't ask you this before the going on the air, so I'm kind of maybe putting you on the spot here. Well, I'm looking at...
I cannot answer, too.
That's true. I mean, I didn't know first, so if you don't know, that's okay. All right, But I'm looking here at the City of Baton Rouge and Parish of East Baton Rouge flood awareness facts. I got this in looking for the regulations for floodplain development, which I couldn't find. But there's a paragraph here which I did read to you, but I didn't reference the particular part. It says the fill restriction requirement. This is for filling in low-lying areas or whatever, like the one out in Jones Creek, the lakes at Jones Creek. In accordance with Section 8.8 or 8:8526 of our floodplain regulations. Okay. There is a conditional restriction, they say, on the placement of fill in the floodplain area and all this other. But then after that paragraph, it says, in addition to the restrictions noted above, our building regulations stipulate that no fill may be placed in a manner which will cause a burden or hardship on adjoining properties. And I thought about this when you were saying, now, okay, we've got the floodplain. We got the plan. We've got the development plan that we were required by the federal government to put in place. We've got the UDC, and these two don't coincide, right?
Yeah.
And the regulations. So, what are these regulations? Are you familiar with those? That's what I was going to put you on the spot for.
Oh, I'm not exactly sure whose regulations those are. That might be state or federal. But because it's also wetlands, it's floodplains, it's there's all kinds of layers of responsibilities for who says what you can do with them.
Okay, well, maybe somebody out there that's listening could
Tell us.
yeah. 343-9927, 343-9927. Help us out here on Section 852 of our floodplain regulations. Anyway, okay, but so really, there shouldn't be any problem anymore since these regulations, which say that there can't be a burden. You can't cause a burden to anybody.
Right. Well, what's a burden? I mean, part of the reason that I don't know that you could find a follow-on document that would define burden, and so.
Then what's the point of having a regulation if you don't define your terms?
Well, I guess that's what keeps lawyers in business. Because somebody says it's a burden and somebody else says it's not.
No, it's
and
not.
So
Yeah,
we got to go to court
burden.
and define out whether it's a burden or not.
And let the judge take care of it, and
right, and
that can of worms. Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Well, and
the elected judge.
yes. Guess who gets his money?
There are women too. Don't discriminate.
Her money.
Yes.
Where they get their money.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, my language. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things that go on with this that are interlocked. There's federal requirements, there's state requirements, there's city parish requirements. They all are sort of named the same thing, but they don't all necessarily match. And so there's this whole attempt to be able to find the right answer to what you're doing. The other thing that I find that is really part of the difficulty with this is that in the parish, developers are responsible for doing the studies for traffic impact and drainage impact.
Okay, and
So if I come to you as a vendor who is doing studies for these things, and I tell you that I have a multi-million-dollar development that's going to be hanging on your report, and I am paying you whatever your current best fee is.
And I am hoping to get more of your business in the future.
Exactly. It is unlikely that your report will say that you can't do that. Interestingly, to my knowledge, the last 10 years or so, almost every development has had absolutely no impact on traffic.
Yeah.
He's going to put 425 lots on that Jones Creek property, which means 850 minimum, 850 cars. It looks like there's only one way in and one way out, and that's onto Jones Creek. And I'm going to bet that there is no impact on traffic.
Yeah. Well, maybe they're going to expand cats out there. Yeah, but that's
maybe.
That's a good point, though. And of course, I guess the Planning Commission will look at these plans that were drawn up, or these assessments that were drawn up by the research firms that were paid by the developer, and they'll say, okay, well, it all meets. It's all squared away, right?
As long as they have met their requirements and the criteria of the UDC, that's all the Planning Commission can do.
Okay, so I'm wondering if maybe there could be some kind of modification, and I suppose I better get off my butt and perhaps submit this suggestion. But it seems to me it'd make more sense for the city to hire a firm.
Yeah, if they had the money for it and they had the personnel for it.
Well, maybe okay, but here's another idea. I'm thinking about that, and of course the same conflicts could arise. As does with the developers. I mean, whoever wants the government's money is going to give them the answer they want, and they're going to want to build too, probably. But anyway, another one is to have a third party, an escrow account or something, where the developer puts the money in, and then the person who handles the escrow account would then go out and find a developer. Something like that. I'm sure there's a way we could at least get some impartiality in there, get some sense to it.
If impartiality was desired, yes.
Well,
but I'm pretty sure that impartiality is not desired, so they're not going out of their way to make it impartial.
Right, but talk to the people in the subdivisions that flooded last summer and who are seeing this building in low-lying areas around their homes now being approved. they're going to want something. I mean, they have a side.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the interesting things that was not brought up in that discussion about the people in the neighborhoods around there who are now concerned about this new development is that they themselves live in a development in a low-lying area.
They flooded somebody else, probably. Yeah.
Yes, and so they got there ahead of time, and now somebody wants to do the same thing that will allow other people to do what they did, which is to move into a low-lying area.
Well, okay, that may not be fair, but...
Well, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying they're not, it's like, try not to pretend that this city just was here when you woke up.
Okay.
It's a process.
I understand, but what else do you do? Do you just say, okay, let's just flood all of ourselves out because we all live here?
No, I mean,
you know?
sure. I mean, everybody should have some say in what they're doing, and,
Yeah.
and we need to do something about it. And when we're trying to do something about it, this is where the conflict comes up. The developers organization and the realtors organization are majorly opposed to this
Of course.
moratorium,
Of course.
because one of their arguments is that the construction workers are they move around. Wherever the work is, that's where they go. So Florida just had the hurricane. Texas just had the hurricane. There's going to be a lot of construction going on.
There is a lot of construction,
that's
right?
where
Yeah.
they're going to
There
go.
will be, yeah.
And last August we had a bunch of people that got flooded out. There was a lot of construction here. People came in to do the work. So if we put a moratorium on, in 6 months people will go away. Well, when the moratorium's off, guess what? They're going to come back.
Right. They're going to come back.
So
yes.
it's not, to me, a logical argument. Not that it's intended to be logical.
No, but I think it's certainly a good idea, at least in light of last year's flooding and everything else, and the areas in which they're building, which I want to get back to, or proposing to build, to stop and take a look at our rules and regulations and how we do things and make it make sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things well, actually a number of things. The UDC needs to be reviewed in toto. I mean, the whole thing's got to be looked at and made to become congruent with our current plan, so that they can actually implement the plan instead of being thwarted in implementing it. Because it's a good plan. They paid a lot for it. And
This is the BR, future BR?
The future BR,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really good plan. It's well thought out, and it talks about sprawl and building in low-lying areas and avoiding that sort of stuff and leaving green space, and the UDC says, forget it.
Yeah.
We need to be able to have a regular program of keeping our drainage ways open.
That's another thing I read where there's a problem with, we're not doing that for one thing. There are drainage ditches that are clogged with old cars, refrigerators, or just not maintained.
Deadfalls, trees,
yeah,
junk.
Yeah.
I know the two guys who are part of a canoeing and kayaking group who went out themselves and cleared, I can't remember which bayou it was, or two of them. And I mean, there's pictures of them with like come-alongs dragging trees out and refrigerators and all kinds of stuff. And they opened up the drainage way so they could canoe on it and kayak on it. But the city parish doesn't maintain a regular system of that.
No, that's unglamorous. I guess it doesn't generate a lot of enthusiasm on voters' parts to.
Well, it doesn't until you got 6 feet of water in your house.
Well, yeah, right.
And then maybe it becomes a little more interesting.
Maybe. Okay, speaking of building, though, let's see. We talked about the lakes at Jones Creek, which you have some detail on, if we can describe that. We'll get that to a second. Get to that in a second. The sanctuary, as I mentioned, out on Baton and Tiger Bend Roads. There's a couple of small related subdivisions, I guess, or developments going on right near me, actually, in the Inniswold subdivision area.
Right.
One of them is southeast of West Inniswold Road, east of Bluebonnet. See, I remembered it this time.
Right.
Yeah, that's a low-lying area. I guess it's an area where water drains to, from all the subdivisions around there. And there's also a smaller development is planned for Inniswold Estates, I think it is. It's in the same area.
Right.
And then there's the Topgolf, I guess they call it. It's a major corporation entertainment company, I guess, that's going to build or wants to build a 55,000 square foot 3-story building just off of Bayou Fountain, south of Segan Lane. Well, there's the Segan Marketplace right there, which was built on land that was filled in.
Right.
And so they're going to extend that fill farther down to build this 5,500 square foot building, further constricting the floodplain of Bayou Fountain.
Right.
So that's in the works. And, Yeah, that's between I-10 and Bayou Fountain. So,
Well, if anybody wonders why that might be a problem, I mean, if you think about the way that the parish actually drains, it drains from the northwest to the southeast. So most of the drainage goes to Amite, Bayou Manchac, Bayou Fontaine, Clay Cut Bayou, all that stuff over there in the south and the east. If you start narrowing or constricting the outlet, which is what that is,
right.
the water gets backed up, which is what happened in August. Zachary and Baker and Central flooded because the water backed up.
Right.
That's because they kept constricting the stuff downstream. In part, there were other things involved, of course, but a big factor is if you're constricting the amount of area that's allowing the water to disperse, then it's not going to disperse. It's going to back up.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a big deal to put a bunch of stuff down in the south part of the parish that constricts drainage and it affects all the way up into the northwest part of the parish.
Right, but people can't see that right now.
Well, yeah.
I mean, well,
they're
the
not
planners,
looking at it. You know?
Right, yeah. Okay, let's talk some more about this lakes at Jones Creek.
Buddy.
You showed me a map earlier of where it is, and they've got 3 retention ponds on it. It looks like, right?
Actually, it's more like 5.
5 retention ponds. Okay, and retention ponds are there to collect water, correct?
Well, I think these retention ponds are actually borrow pits. So they got dirt from these places to maybe raise or to level off the place they were developing.
Okay.
Okay. And because it's in a low-lying area and it's in the water table and everything else, they fill up with water.
Right.
So in the event of a rain, water, this whole area where these ponds are is undeveloped. Now, it's developed all the way around it.
Yes, it's surrounded by subdivisions, mostly up, higher middle class, nice places.
Yeah. Some pretty big stuff. You go on Google Satellite, you can zoom down in there, and it's like, these are not cheap places. But it's the only open area right there, and it has a number of these sort of retention ponds that are there. But if they're already full, they're not capable of taking in much more water.
No, they're pretty useless, actually, as far as flood control.
Yeah. So what happens is that other open area is there to absorb some of this runoff water.
Right.
Okay.
And actually the subdivisions that surround that area, even though they flooded last summer, the water was draining to that area anyway. Just that area was saturated and you couldn't take anymore.
Right.
And the water had no place to go.
It helped disperse some of the water that the upstream developments then only got like 1 to 3 feet instead of 3 to 6 feet.
Right.
So
it made it better.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that they should drown, but it's just that if you look at the flood map and the flood map and these things that you were talking about with the UDC and all the other things related to this are available through the Baton Rouge City Parish website, which is brgov.com, which is very strange, but nonetheless, brgov.com. They have the flood map from last summer, and if you look at that place on Jones Creek, it was underwater.
This is where the proposed
lakes at Jones Creek. Yeah, that whole area around there was pretty much flooded out. So what the developer is planning to do is to raise that property with dirt he's going to get from somewhere, and I have no idea where. Raise it any number of feet, probably 3 to 4 feet, and then build on it. Then we get into that thing about how the developer pays the guy to do the study to see if what he's doing is going to affect the drainage, and their study says it will have no effect on the drainage.
Right. In fact, they were just declared meeting the minimum restrictions.
Right. They got the approval from the Planning Commission.
Right.
So everybody who lives around there is now going to have a 3 to 5 foot or a 1 to 3 foot wall where their water is going to go. So how that's not going to affect the drainage, I don't know. But, they say their pros tell them no, it's not going to affect it.
Right. And really, as you mentioned on the phone, we were talking a few days ago, how can you prove that a new development caused the flooding when it happens?
Right.
how
I mean,
can you
and
prove it?
that's
especially when the developers have this signed off report saying that
Right.
this isn't going to do it.
right. Yeah. To assign responsibility for flooding to some particular development, unless they've done something really crazy, like built an actual dam on their property upstream, which will divert the water to everybody else but them.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to be that stupid. Hopefully.
No, they wouldn't be that obvious about it.
Right. Well, right. They'd be much more subtle about
Yeah.
it. So, to prove that they did it, especially as you say, when they've already gotten a study that says that what they're doing is not going to affect it, then they're just going to fall back and say, look, we've got this study. The city parish approved it. We couldn't be at fault for this because our study says it didn't happen.
Right, sure.
So there you
And everybody's happy except the people that get flooded.
Yeah.
And they're the people that I think, again, I've said this before in other topics for local problems, it's going to take people getting out, getting aware, and speaking to their leaders. And so I despair.
Well, I mean, that was one of the things in that news article about the neighborhood association talking about this thing, the lakes on Jones Creek, and the head of the neighborhood association that was north of this property, it was concerned about the drainage thing, and her statement was something to the effect of, why is the onus of this put on us, the responsible citizens? And it's like, because if you don't take responsibility for it, they're going to run over you with a bulldozer.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell them you're concerned, it's not like the city's in a position to tell them. That's the thing about the UDC. The UDC is the thing that says you can and can't do this. Well, if the UDC says you can do it, their hands are tied.
Right.
They're not going to be able to say don't do it because you're meeting the
You're
criteria.
meeting the requirements that apparently the responsible citizens approved of. I mean, I'm sure everybody read those regulations when they were first proposed, right?
Via their duly elected representatives on the Metro Council.
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
Like I said, I despair.
I weep for humanity.
Well, I do. I just hope we can keep it all together till I croak. That's what we talk about.
Let's at least get it to the next. Well, no, forget it.
Yeah, no. That's just one step at a time, anyway. Okay.
Right.
But anyway, speaking of planning and the lack thereof, or inadequate planning that's inadequate, but. I also have an article here. It's from the Baton Rouge Business Report titled HNTB Selected to Create Master Plan for Baton Rouge Stormwater. And it says in here that Baton Rouge has never had a master plan for stormwater drainage before.
Yes, well, it doesn't surprise me.
Nobody ever thought of that.
Well, actually, this is interesting because we just had, I don't know how many decades it took, the storm sewer overflow system, the SSO program. Our drainage system is a combination storm and sewer drainage. So this master plan on drainage is going to be tied in to this thing that we just spent, I don't know how many $100 million on, and they're still building, and how that's going to affect both of those things, So, and as the weather changes and we get more of these rain events that no one can predict, although we all seem fairly certain that it's going to be more of them.
It's going to get worse, yeah.
How do we do this? This thing about the 25-year flood event is a very, very conservative effort to deal with the problem.
Conservative meaning least amount of impact, least amount of disruption,
least amount
for the
of
people building.
Yes, because the flood last August was considered a 1,000-year event, which means there was one chance in 1,000 it would happen any one year.
Right.
Well, they're talking about one chance of a thing happening in 25 years. So it's like it's not really that much.
Right. Although I'll be honest with you, and I'll tell the listeners too. I'm in a flood zone X where I live.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't flood. Never has flooded. Ain't going to do it. That's what we're told.
Right.
And yet, when I saw what happened with Houston in Hurricane Harvey, places that had never flooded, and they're a flood zone X,
right,
I thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get flood insurance, and I did.
Yeah.
Then I found out, belatedly, that there were plenty of flood zone X's that flooded last summer here in Baton Rouge.
Right.
And it appears to me that with climate change, all bets are off as far as these 1,000-year, 100-year, 25-year floods. We don't know what's coming or how often, really.
Well, and that should be, I mean, in an ideal world, we would plan for the worst and be ready for the least. So we would institute a regular schedule of going out and cleaning the bayous and the drainage ways. We would make sure that we didn't allow people to build in floodplains. We would make sure that if people did build in floodplains, they had to build above a higher level. We would get the UDC to match our plan, and the plan, which is a good plan, would then be congruent, and we can move forward with the least amount of damage to the greatest number of people, whereas now we're benefiting the fewest number of people with the greatest amount of harm.
Yeah, and chances are it's because, like you alluded to earlier, the smaller number of people are the ones who really have an interest in things, and the rest of us, well, everything's fine for me today. Yeah. I'm not worried about anything.
Yeah. Well, that's the human condition.
It is. It is the human condition, and that's sad, but true. And we're just there now, and I guess we can take solace though in the fact that that man hasn't caused all this climate change, right?
Off your knees and on your feet, people.
Yes. Well, I mean,
pitchforks and torches down to the city hall.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, it's looking like we're out of time. But I'm really sorry because you're a very interesting person to talk with, Mark, and you know a lot about what's happening here in Baton Rouge with the floodplains and construction and just general stuff. Yeah, neat stuff, yeah. But anyway, you've been listening to Wayne Parker with our great guest, Mark Martin, here. We're talking about building on floodplains. Check out the goings-on at the Metro Council tonight. They're meeting tonight and next Wednesday and the Wednesday after that, I suppose. And they're going to fix all these things if you guys get out there. We get out there and make them do it. That's the best
contact your representatives. Tell them what you want. Make sure they know. They may not act on it, but at least you've told them.
Yes. Well, anyway, we got to go. You guys have a good evening. You've been listening to Wayne Parker and Mark Martin here on A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. You have a good night.
Online.